Hey everybody, this is Matt at Give, and this is Give Live. Welcome to our fourth iteration of Give Live. It's a monthly webinar, and we try to talk about all things online donations and help you understand a little bit more about Give specifically and how to do really great donation campaigns on your WordPress site. Today, we have a special guest with us, Chris Teitzel from Locker.io. And he's going to be talking with us a bit about securing your online donations. And this is the first time we're doing this webinar on Wednesday. That's actually going to be our day for the ongoing future. So second Wednesday of the month at 5 o'clock Pacific time, we're going to do Give Live now. And we're hoping that's a more convenient time for folks and that people can be online for this. And because we think the questions that you bring are really important in the context of this conversation. So try to set it on your calendar, second Wednesday of every month. Next month, we're going to be talking about payment gateways and how to choose a payment gateway. And we have special guests, actually. We're going to have two folks from Stripe, Stripe.com. They're going to be with us on the webinar live. And they're going to be able to talk with us a little bit about how Stripe handles payments. And we'll talk about our Give integration with Stripe. And they also have a couple of things they want to give us a heads up on for new features coming down that they're building out right now for the future. So that's next month, the second Wednesday. I forget the date off the top of my head. It's also the 8th. Yes, Wednesday, March 8th at 5 p.m. Pacific time. We'll be here with two guys, one guy also named Matt from Stripe.com. So we're excited about that. But today we're going to talk about securing your online donations. We want to talk specifically about how exactly that Give handles online donations and how that's done securely. And we're also going to talk a little bit about Locker.io and how that makes it even more secure, and specifically some things to watch for, and so that you have a better understanding. Sometimes when you go to if you have a board, if you're a nonprofit and you have a board, they have specific questions about security, which are really important questions, and we want to try to talk about that today specifically, so that you're informed and prepared for those kinds of conversations. So, introduce yourself and just tell us just a little bit about you and what you do with Locker, and besides that as well.
Sure. So my name is Chris Teitzel. I'm the founder and CEO of Locker. I worked in the CMS and open source world for about 8 years now, ranging from all sorts of stuff from front end to security, and really have honed in on security in the past few years here, because there are some holes that we're trying to patch in the security community, in the open source community in general. And so we've been working feverishly in the encryption world, and that leads leads ourselves to go into a whole bunch of different things, from payment gateways and everyone that's trying to utilize encryption in the open source world. So that's where my background comes in, and we've built. I also have a services company that builds websites, and so we've built e-commerce, and we've built donation portals for nonprofits, for large enterprise. And no matter the size, they all come back with the same questions, and they all come back with the same concerns. And so that's really, if anything, that we can get through this session. I think it's no matter your size, you still have to walk through the same procedures, and you still have to walk through some of the same steps to make sure that you're protecting yourself, but then also protecting your customers and your constituents. Because if you have a data leak, or if something goes wrong, it really can do some brand damage. And so we try to step in and enable people so that they don't have to worry about anything.
Nice. Sounds great. Great. So I see we have a few viewers already. If you guys have questions specifically about security in any way whatsoever, feel free to chime in on the live chat so we can incorporate those into our discussion. We have just 4 points we're going to walk through today. First one is just an overview of security concerns with your WordPress website or with donations in general. Second one is how Give handles donations securely. And I'm typing those into the chat box for everybody to reference as well. And then we're going to talk about Locker specifically. Chris has an exciting announcement for us today, which we'll talk about for sure. And then lastly, we're just going to wrap up with open discussion and questions. So definitely start chiming in with your questions now, so we'll incorporate those into our discussion. So first off, overview of security with donations specifically and WordPress specifically. So the way I always personally like to talk about online security, specifically with WordPress, is to help people understand that there are layers of security. That security is not just a monolithic thing, that if you just install a plugin, you're good to go. That's actually a misnomer or not the whole truth. So there's server level security. This the easiest way to break it down is what I would say. There's server level security, and there's app level security, and there's domain level security, or basically communication level security. And what we're talking about specifically with payment gateways and Locker specifically also is basically at the domain level, at the communication level. It's what's going out from your website in one way or another. So the short answer for server level security is that you really should have a really good host. That's the short answer for that. Your host is responsible to make sure that that at the server level you don't get hacked from their side. And that there are ways in which the app level, which in this case we're talking about, the app is WordPress. And there are ways in which the app itself sometimes can make the server be vulnerable. WordPress actually just pushed out a big security update. Yeah, it just happened. Was it today or yesterday? I think it was yesterday.
Yeah.
It was basically patching a security issue that would make your website vulnerable. So that's app level security, and then domain level security is how your domain is handled. And I don't know if you saw the big news. It was Chris. I do think I am getting a little bit of echo right now for some reason. I don't know if there's a way to if there's speakers somewhere, but there is at the domain level, there's several different things that happen. And earlier, late last year, there was a giant, like global issue with domain level security, which was where Twitter was down and Netflix was down and all these big things were down. And that was because they were all serving their domains over this one central service that had a giant DDoS attack.
It was IoT actually, so they were able to. Yeah. It was one of the first times that we've seen a broad level IoT attack or IoT devices used in a DDoS attack. I was reading reports that it wasn't actually even a very sophisticated attack. It was a couple of script kiddies that unleashed this on the world and then realized afterwards what they had done. But yeah, so you have all those different layers, and a lot of the times the way that we describe it is defense in depth. You can't have a single point and expect that to be your only layer of security. David Strauss, and I work with him a bunch, and he always describes it as Death Star security. You don't want to have one layer, and then that one layer can just be penetrated and the whole thing just blows up, right? You want to have layer upon layer upon layer of security, and that's how you really make yourself as secure as possible online.
That's a great analogy, especially since Rogue One came out. Now we know exactly why the Death Star had that one, because they put it there on purpose. A hacker was there and was like, let's make this thing vulnerable.
Exactly.
Which was good in the end. But yeah, no, for sure. So at the app level, for example, let's back up just a little bit. At the app level, that's what a lot of WordPress users are familiar with. They use security plugins like iTheme Security or WordFence or things like this. And those are securing WordPress, looking for ways in which you can tighten the way WordPress works and functions. They're not quite the same thing as a firewall. A firewall actually sits outside of the app. And WordFence, despite the name, is actually not technically a firewall either, because it really lives and resides in WordPress itself. A firewall really is something different.
And Sucuri acts as that firewall, the web application firewall. So it monitors all traffic coming through. And the benefit of having some sort of WAF, as people refer it, the best part of having a WAF like that, especially one that's dedicated around WordPress, is that when vulnerabilities do come out, they normally have an inroad to what those vulnerabilities are before they're made public, and they can actually protect at the firewall layer requests that are coming in that would be nefarious. And so it can block SQL injection attacks and so if your code is not patched, you're still protected because you have that extra layer out there that knows that you're running WordPress and not just a general firewall.
Yep, for sure. There's a similar thing that's used in iTheme security, and it's its own standalone thing as well, called brute force protection, which works very similarly. That when they see repeated attacks happening across a lot of WordPress sites from specific IP addresses, they can blacklist them, and those go in effect on anybody who's running brute force protection on through different services.
And one of the things I credit the WordPress community with, especially recently with a lot of the announcements around SSL, is really pushing SSL for all sites. Nowadays, every host should have cheap and or free options with Let's Encrypt. It's now available to anyone, anywhere. And that really brings basic security. I mean, if you are doing any type of online donation or online form, SSL is a must. And so when you're looking at your host and when you're looking at that layer, examining, do they have those firewalls? Do they have those web application firewalls? But then also, do they provide SSL certificates, or do you have to go get one? And how is that set up? Because a form without SSL is one that's just asking to be attacked.
Yeah, Chris, how would you classify in my three simplistic things: server, app, and domain level? How would you classify SSL being? Because it kind of branches kind of across them in some ways, but
it branches the domain and the server level, I would say. Yeah. In you have to have the SSL certs, live and come from the server level, but it also acts at your domain. You have options now with Cloudflare. They have free SSL, and that's actually at the domain level. They intercept the message. They will serve an SSL out to your customers, and they'll turn around and then do an internal SSL call. So you don't have to have the same certificate delivered to your end customers as you do between the server and the domain. So yeah, it does branch those, but it's a consideration that everyone needs to take into account when they're looking at their hosts and when they're setting up their servers, if they're doing it on their own, is SSL is a must. That's first and foremost of any form, any donation, any payment, anywhere.
Yep, absolutely. That I think that's also a misnomer that I agree. I see that misnomer quickly dying. That I think the education on SSL and HTTPS is getting out really quickly. But one misnomer I think is, I only need it if I'm doing e-commerce, and that's absolutely not the case at all anymore. If you have
even
a
the
contact
login
form.
forms,
yeah, exactly.
Contact forms, login forms, all of those. And the other misnomer is that while focusing on SSL is important and it's a great thing to do, it really is not, I have an SSL cert and I'm done. That's one layer in that defense in depth. And it's a critical layer, but it's not your end all. You can't just say I have SSL and therefore I must be okay.
Yep, for sure. Yep. I like Cloudflare too for a lot of reasons. And I typically, when I've done SSL, I usually like to install an SSL like Let's Encrypt, and then also use Cloudflare, but not their SSL trigger, basically. I like Cloudflare just for their domain level security and also performance as well.
You get CDN and everything else. And in the chat window, SSL is complicated and tricky. It it's getting better, and I think that's what is really on the hosting providers and on the servers, folks who are setting up those servers. It's something that you should demand from your host and say, I need to have access to a cheap and easy SSL cert, or an option to get there. The easiest way is to sometimes just purchase it through your hosting provider. So if you're on a GoDaddy, if you're on a Media Temple, any of those services will allow you to purchase the SSL cert through them. They provision it and they'll set it up for you and help you with that process. And then again, if you have Cloudflare, that also provides you with a free SSL cert, and that's super easy to set up as well. It's in the setup options.
Yep, for sure. That one thing that I really evaluate a host by is basically that they really emphasize security as being really important, and then that they provide SSL certificates. Nowadays, I'm like, if you don't provide SSL certificates that I can just be like, hey, install it on my site, then I don't really think it's a very good host.
Well, and that's where WordPress is moving in general. They're going to be only recommending hosts that provide SSL options now. So one thing though to go back and emphasize is the way to look at SSL is that it's encrypting traffic in transit, and data in transit, and that's one layer. Is so it's securing communications between the device and the server, so that you're talking over the open web in a private conversation. However, whatever happens after that, once the data hits the server, is just as important, especially in online donations, in e-commerce, and anything where you're dealing with financial data. Anywhere the financial data touches falls under PCI compliance. It falls under a higher level of security, and so that's where you want to start looking at, okay, I'm securing data in transit with the SSL certificate, but then what am I doing with that data once it hits my server? And the first thing we always tell folks is, if you don't need it, don't store it. I've unfortunately in my years of developing, I've had clients hand me a database that has credit card, date, CVV, everything in it, and I just go, you don't know what you're doing. You don't know how bad this is. And so once somebody gives you that data, it's your responsibility to work with it and make sure that you keep it secure.
Yeah, even on the support side, I've had folks sometimes submit a support ticket and be like, here's the keys to everything I got. And I'm like, I'm deleting everything. And
my favorite is when somebody emails me the root password to their server. I just say, well, now I just got another 10 hours worth of work to reset everything up here. So exactly. But when we get specifically into the security concerns around donations, and this is what I got to commend you guys at Give, is that you guys look at what is the most secure and what's the easiest way for our customers to have a secure environment when they're going through donations. And so you're using the most PCI compliant methods available that all the payment providers are starting to give. You're using the JavaScript option rather than passing everything through back to the PHP level in WordPress and passing it over there. That alone, that step of submitting directly to the payment gateways is one that lowers the burden on the server and its PCI compliance dramatically. And so that's something that, as people look at how am I making my donations, what payment gateways am I using, and what services am I using, that's something they need to evaluate, and that's something that Give offers.
Yep. I'm going to back up just a little bit because I want to go into detail on that, which is our second point. Vintuitive is asking, aren't there free SSL certificates available? Yes, the option that Chris mentioned from Cloudflare, their SSL is free, actually. Let's Encrypt is also free. And when I was mentioning that I think that hosts should be providing SSL certificates, most of them offer them through Let's Encrypt nowadays. Most of the really good hosts that do basically a one-click SSL setup for you, they do it with Let's Encrypt. There is also ways you can set up Let's Encrypt on your own, but that does get pretty technical. They need to be renewed often and things like that. But
Yeah.
as long as your host is providing that for you, then that's definitely the way to go. And then the one other
there
step,
are extra levels of certs as well, and that's
Yeah.
the thing that I always get questions about. Or what's the difference between the EV cert and the wildcard and the,
Mhm.
it all goes back to the trust that somebody has between the device and the server. The EVs, basically what they do is they're the more expensive ones. They give you the little green checkbox on the top, but those are the ones that they go back and they say, okay, we're going to not only validate that you're having a private conversation, but we're going to make sure that we validate the person that you're having that conversation
Yep.
with is who they say they are.
Yep.
And so that's what those extra layers on the certificates are.
Yep. The best example is if you go to your bank website. If you go to bankofamerica.com, for example, up in the address bar, you're going to see that green lock, and it's going to say on it Bank of America. It doesn't say VeriSign or something like that. But with the free certificates, those are not EV certificates, so they're just going to say secure. And the way that Chrome, for example, reflects that is changing subtly right now.
Mm-hmm. But it's important to note that the underlying encryption is no different.
Yeah.
No matter what cert you have, it's just the added levels of validation, and then sometimes the higher end certs come with insurance policies and guarantees as well. So it's not saying that free is the only way to go or paid is the only way to go. It really is. There's a layer there.
Yep. So let's move to the how Give handles donations securely, what Chris was mentioning just a minute ago. So the reason why I wanted to mention the three levels of security is specifically because that it helps to explain what Chris was explaining. So, for example, your credit card information. The reason why it you Give basically doesn't negatively impact your PCI compliance in any way is that your website does not touch credit card information. So how can that be? I've mentioned it to a couple of folks and they immediately say, well, how is that possible? Because they type it into the form and then I have this information in the back end of Give. You don't have the credit card information at all. What you have is the donor information, which is why you need to make sure that you have an SSL certificate. What happens with the credit card information is it's actually sent at the domain level. Basically, it's sent out from the site through your browser. So it's because it's sent over JavaScript. That's what Chris was alluding to. Is basically it's a browser side communication, and that means that credit card information is never actually going to your database in any way. It's not really touching your server in any way whatsoever. It's not touching PHP. It's all basically through the browser, and that's basically the way that that you have no liability in this way. As long as you have a SSL certificate there, you're sending that information over JavaScript to Stripe or PayPal or Authorize whatnot to your payment gateway, your actual website server. That's again just my simplistic way of explaining how that works and what that means exactly.
And under the hood a little bit, what's actually going on is when I enter in my credit card information, whether it's into a device or into the laptop, that's being submitted directly to Stripe. Stripe's then giving back a token that says, go give this to the website and they'll know what to do with it. In the background, that token then goes back and that token acts as a kind of a fake credit card number that is a one-time use only for that transaction.
Yep.
And it's super secure. And there's actually an even more secure way that we're starting to see payment providers do these forms is they're actually using iframes so that when you're typing into the form, you're not typing into the form as it sits on the browser. You're actually typing into the form as it sits on their domain, on their servers, and it's even one layer extra in security. So the payment gateways, and you guys are going to have Stripe on next month. They've been leading the way in this and really pushing best practices throughout the community.
Yep. Exactly. Isn't the iframe isn't that actually even created via JavaScript?
Yeah. So it's created via JavaScript, and then it's going out and building that iframe. And the iframe goes and gets the form directly from the provider and brings it back. So
Yep.
when you get into the PCI compliance around it, there's a small difference between the JavaScript version and the iframe version, simply because you have to verify that when you give a page that it hasn't been modified, that the JavaScript isn't modified to go to somebody else. With an iframe, there's no possibility of that occurring, so that lowers your risk down even further.
Yep, that's a good point, because with the standard way that, for example, how Stripe works right now, via JavaScript, it outputs these HTML fields onto your site, and those fields are just fields. They're normal form fields that can be manipulated. For example, they can be styled with CSS. And so once you actually serve up an iframe, a bunch of fields via an iframe, then you can't actually style them anymore. So that's, I think, one limitation of that part. And styling your forms is like, people are really emotional about that. They want their forms to look really, really good.
And you'll have better returns on it because the form looks better, it acts better if you have control over it. And that's where having those third-party pages was kind of a downer. In order, people would go to these third-party pages and it would provide a higher level of security, but then you lose all the branding and people have to redirect around. And so this is a really good way of doing it. And what you see is it's the self-assessment questionnaire, the SAQ from the PCI Council. There's SAQ-A and then there's SAQ-AEP. And these are what people need to key in on, is that if you're using the JavaScript options, you fall under AEP. And that means that you have A is as low as it gets, and that's the iframe option or a third-party option. And then you have this AEP, which is kind of a half layer above it. If you can stay in that SAQ-A and SAQ-AEP realm, the amount of audit that you need to have and the amount of controls that you need to have in place dramatically decrease from having all the data flow through your servers and out. And nobody wants to manage that. So definitely look at options that give you those PCI SAQ-A and SAQ-AEP validations.
So there's two things I wanted to highlight. One is some of the things that we're talking about today, Chris actually wrote about on our website, and it's definitely worth a read. I'm pasting that into the chat box right now. You want to give that a read at some point. And it's also a good resource to keep coming back to later when you're like, oh, I forgot what they were talking about on that webinar. Just go to that blog article and you can get a refresher a little bit.
Yeah.
And then secondly, when we were talking about SSL certificates earlier, if you launched your site without an SSL certificate and then you have to convert it over, there is an issue with what's called insecure elements, which is basically that all of your images and your JavaScript files, CSS files are all being loaded over HTTP and not over HTTPS because of the way that WordPress stores this post information. So we have a very detailed tutorial on our site on how to convert your HTTP site over to HTTPS. I'm pasting that in right now. Give a read to both of those because they're really valuable resources on all of these items. So with that, I want to move to our next item. We're flying by on these things. I want to talk about Locker. Yeah, and there's, and we're really still just scratching the surface. These are, we're just given the cliff notes of this stuff. But let's jump into Locker. First of all, you mentioned a little bit in your intro, a little bit about it, but tell us specifically about Locker, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, so what Locker does is it really brings a enterprise level key management and encryption to the masses. And that's our goal in all that we're doing, is saying we want to bring what only the top websites in the world can afford to and have the skill and the know-how to implement. We want to bring those to the major communities. So we have a plugin for WordPress. We've got plugins for other CMSs as well. And what it does, what Locker does, is it takes keys, it takes tokens, it takes anything, we call them secrets, anything that you want to keep secret, and it stores it in a vault on our end. And it stores it according to the highest level of security standards and best practices. And to give you an idea, some of the services that are comparable, if you were to go out and buy the enterprise level security that we're providing, it's $25,000, $30,000 a year just to scratch the surface of this. And we bring it down and actually make it, the first key is free. And so anyone can hop into it and try it out. And after that, it's incredibly cheap to use. And so what we do is we work with plugin providers and all sorts of folks to say, okay, let's take those keys, and rather than storing them in the database, let's store them we're going to encrypt them and store them in Locker. The reason why we encrypt them before we store them is that I don't want to know anyone's keys. I always joke with folks that we can actually publish our Locker database in the public and no one would know what to do with it, because every key is encrypted in there. And so we don't know what it is. You hear the end-to-end encryption. We basically provide end-to-end encryption for keys, so that only your site knows how to access it. And in addition to that, we also do environment provisioning. So if your hosting provider gives you a development environment and it gives you a production environment, we actually know the difference between the two of them, and we can send production keys to production and development keys to development. Every developer's had that oops moment where all of a sudden I just sent an email out to everyone that I wasn't supposed to, because I was using my SendGrid key that was my public key instead of my test key. We help prevent that by keeping those keys separate. And so part of the run up to today and to this session is that we now officially have integrations with Give. And so yep. And so we will be you should be seeing those come down the wire here within the next hour or two. And what those do is it's going to start taking all of the secret keys that Give is currently storing and add one layer of security on top of it. Again, it's the defense in depth approach. It's not that the way that Give is storing them right now is bad, and it's just adding extra layers upon extra layers. And the nice thing, once you take that step and integrate with Locker, is that your database, you can hand that database to a series of developers, and they're not going to have access to your production keys. And so if you're working with folks that are offshore or contract developers that you have a turnover with, it's a great way to kind of protect your production environment and protect your production keys away from your developers and away from just the public in general if they were to get access to your servers. So yeah, and that integration is it's smooth. You enable Locker and it'll automatically know what keys, because we're telling Locker what keys to go look for within Give, and it'll go and look within Give and start pulling out keys. So if you're using the Stripe module, it'll go get the Stripe secret key and store that, and it's going to add those extra layers on top of what Give already provides.
Nice. That sounds great. So I just want to clarify a little bit. So our users who use PayPal, for example, they log into their PayPal site, they grab their let's say their live keys, and they paste them into Give. And that's how they're going to communicate between their website and PayPal. What does Locker do for them right as soon as you do that? Right as soon as they hit save settings?
So when they hit save settings, what we're doing is right before Give goes to store in the database, we go in and we scrape out the secret keys. We store them out in Locker, and we provide back. Actually, it gets really nerdy and technical at this point, but we do what we call key wrapping. So we encrypt the key, and then we leave in place of the key another key, and so that key is the only thing that can unlock the encrypted value that Locker stores. And so if you look at the options array that gets stored in the database, once you get to that secret key, you're just going to have this long encrypted value that nobody's going to know what it is. And that's a placeholder. And then when Give goes to access and go talk to Stripe or go talk to PayPal or any of the gateways, And it's not just payment gateways, MailChimp and Constant Contact and all the different plugins that require these API keys. We can take those, store them in Locker, and then at the time when Give needs them, it requests it back from Locker, and it gets it. And there's no ongoing maintenance. There's no setup. There's no anything. It's enable Locker, start using Give as you always are, and your keys are now secure.
Nice.
And again, it's one of those things where key management at this level used to take hours upon days of programming and extra services and all that. And we're trying to bring that back to just enable Locker, and you've got key management now. And we're going to be rolling out in subsequent releases, we're going to be rolling out the ability to encrypt posts, to bring encryption into various levels of WordPress as well. And another thing to mention is that we're also, we believe in data sovereignty. And so as we started building Locker, we started getting feedback from the community. We were talking to folks over in Europe, and they said, well, no offense, but I don't want any of my secret data to be stored in US servers. And so we have
I'm glad
isolated,
you're going there, because that's where I was going to go.
Yep. So we have isolated European servers that serve just the European community and allow folks to choose. I want my keys stored in Europe. I want my keys stored in the US, and it adds layers upon layers. And the European community, I commend them, because they've actually taken a step ahead of us in data protection, and their rules and regulations demand key management and encryption in a lot of these situations. And so now folks over in the EU are starting to scramble and trying to figure out, how do I manage my keys and where do I manage my keys? And so we bring that to all the communities.
Yep. Kevin makes a comment. So you're kind of storing a pointer in the WordPress database. Is that more or less the way to describe it?
Yeah. So what gets stored in the actual options is a we call it just the machine name of the key, and then we keep a secondary table that maps machine name to encrypted key value, and then that encrypted key value then it decrypts the other encrypted key value, and all the layers on top of it. So yeah, so it doesn't. The idea is that it shouldn't to give to any of the plugins. They should act no different. They don't even know Locker's there. It's just right before anything gets written to the database, we kind of sniff through it and say, oh, this is secret, pop it over to Locker.
What actually happens at the point of donation? Because every time that Give communicates with Stripe, it has to send a key in one way or another. What's happening at that level?
So when so back to that token exchange. Say I'm using Stripe. I'm going to go in and enter my Stripe key, or I'm going to enter my credit card. I'm going to submit that payment to Stripe. Stripe hands back a token. That token is what the form on the website submits back to WordPress and says, okay, here's a token, go verify that. And Give takes that token and it accesses Stripe and says, is this token valid? Did they just pay? Well, in order for Give to talk to Stripe, it needs that secret key. And that's where that secret key comes in place. So right before Give talks to Stripe, it actually does a get option call to the database to say, hey, give me my secret key so that I can talk to Stripe. And we intercept that get option call, look at it and say, oh, this is one of our keys. Well, we're going to go get it for you. And then it seamlessly passes it back into the chain. And again, Give doesn't even know Locker exists. Locker sits in the background and starts to filter the keys out as needed.
Nice. Yeah, we've had a couple. We have a couple articles and different, and I think also a couple webinars that where we've mentioned the way in which Give is built is to be extensible. And you and I chatted a bit a few months ago about you building out this this integration, and pretty much the only way you were able to do that was through the different hooks and filters that Give has available, right?
Exactly, and for us, and we go out and build all these patches. And so if folks out there say, hey, this is a plugin that I really like, but I want to see it patched, let us know. We can go patch it. But more and more folks are starting to, on that options array, right before it gets set, they apply a filter and say, you know, if anyone else needs to modify something in this, go for it. And you know, Give is a perfect example. you guys actually not only have that option filter in place, you centralize all of your options into one array. And what that does for us is that we don't have to go write 15, 20, 80 different patches. We write one patch, and now Give is secure.
Nice.
And all the APIs keys that are there are now secure. So it's credit to the developers with the foresight to know, hey, somebody at some point is going to need to filter this data, and we can go in and grab that and run with it.
Nice. That's great to hear. I mean, I kind of set you up for that, but I mean, it's great to hear.
No, and to be honest, you are a not, let's put it this way, you're rare in that we are finding more and more that folks aren't doing that. And so we're having to go out and submit patches to the plugins and say, hey, if you just put in a filter at this one point, this one line update, if you put in this filter, then we can start securing your plugin. Give is so extensible that wasn't even a concern. So yeah, it's more and more we're starting to see it happen, but you guys definitely are leading the way with that.
Cool. Yeah, so we're at the end. We're talking about open discussion and questions. How I'm going to handle this is basically me and Chris are going to talk about whatever we want. And if you have questions, just chime in and I'll stop everything and see if we can address that right away. Chris, my big question that I'd like, or topic or subject that I'd like to chat about for the next 5 minutes or so while people ask questions is how do you see security evolving over this next year, specifically in WordPress? What do you think are going to be like hot topics or sensitive issues? I mean, the REST API obviously is probably going to continue to be an issue in one way or another. Yep. Not an issue. I mean, it's something everybody's excited about, but this vulnerability that was patched this week was about the REST API.
Was in the REST API, yeah. And the REST API is what allows WordPress to play in the enterprise world, right? It's as you start to go up the stack in terms of the sites, you're leaving the blogs and the smaller websites and going into the enterprise world. That REST API is necessary, but protecting that REST API is critical. And so, yeah, I think you're going to see a lot more effort around the REST API and protecting that. But as we see, and we've seen this with other CMSs, as we see the CMS start to grow into the enterprise realm, what happens to it, and especially when it has those the REST API layer on it, is that you're no longer alone. It's no longer just a monolithic website. You're seeing microservices occur around these websites. And so your websites are connecting into other sources are connecting into it. And so the website becomes even more of a vector for attack because hackers are looking for, they basically go around and knock on doors. And once one opens, they stick their foot in it and they try to figure out, how can I weasel my way through? A perfect example, and this is pointing to the past to look at the future, is the Target attack. The Target attack that compromised all of the credit card terminals. That came through an unsecure or an insecure connection into a Windows box that was given to a service provider that wanted to be able to put data into the financial system. Well, that piece was not secure. Someone was able to get into that, and then all of a sudden they were able to ripple themselves all the way to the credit card terminals. And so I think as you see WordPress start to go upstream, become more enterprise with the REST API and everything else, you're going to see it be a vector for attack on other systems. And so that's where we really want to be on the forefront of it and watch it. IoT, everything is IoT now. And so that's kind of the next layer, in this DDoS attack that occurred is a very good example of what happens when that's not monitored. And so I think more and more now you're actually going to be able to see WordPress interacting with IoT. And again, how does that connection occur, and how can a WordPress site drive your refrigerator, your stove, or something like that? It's cool possibilities, but it's also very scary from a security point.
Yeah, we actually at our local meetup we had a presentation on Internet of Things and how you can use WordPress together with that. So he had a 2016 site up, and he just
Mhm.
clicked a button, and next to him he had one of those like toy monkeys with symbols, and he clicked the button,
Yep.
and the monkey starts banging the
Oh yeah.
symbols together. It was just
Uh,
like a really fun example of how you could do stuff like that. I
if you want to
pray that
see,
never happens to me. I don't want anybody with a button with a monkey next to me like annoying me all day. But
if
I
you really
definitely
want to
think.
see the cutting edge, one of the coolest examples that I've seen in the CMS world is, imagine you have a WooCommerce store that is running your local supermarket. You could tie that into Alexa, and somebody could
Mhm,
be in their house and say, Alexa, what's the price of rice? And
mhm,
it can come back, check the WooCommerce, and come back and say, well, rice is this price, and well, can you order this for me? And similar to how you interact with Amazon, you can now start interacting your e-commerce stores into the Internet of Things, into Alexa and Google Home
mhm,
and all these different devices. So
mhm,
uh, Kevin has a question about how do you signal security on the page? The badge, everyone had the little security badge,
mhm,
semantic secure and secured by so and so and whatnot. Uh, It's one of those things where I always like to put a little blurb that says, "Hey, we take your data seriously, and here's what we're doing." On the credit card forms, put in something that says that. Something down in the footer. Privacy policies, people actually read those, so have them. Um, there are ways to do it. You don't just have to have the old badge, but more so now, like you mentioned there, Kevin. Um, the first thing I do is I look for the SSL in the address bar, and I have reamed sites that I go to, and I look at the address bar, and there is no SSL occurring at all, and they're asking me for a credit card. I will call them up and lay into them, and it's one of those things where I think. Google and Chrome is doing a really good job too now, that if you go to a site that doesn't have that, and they're trying to fake it, or they're trying to do something, it'll start to send out alerts now and say, hey, this is not secure, just FYI. So
Yep. Yeah, Google's really cracking
yeah.
down on it. I mean, it's a big priority for sure, but the way that they're going to be changing up the address bar is a big deal. And I
Yep.
think that's one thing that actually we didn't make really explicit at the beginning is that I think one thing that people have to recognize is that the SSL is really about protecting your donors when it
Mhm.
comes to donations. You definitely want to protect your site as well, but I mean, in this case, like you were saying, it's protecting their data. It's protecting
Yeah.
them from having their credit card information pulled from your form in one way or another. So it's really important to make sure that you know that that's what you're doing. You're looking out for your donors, make sure that they're
Mhm.
protected. So
Mhm. And Kevin, yeah, straightforward explanation over flashy badges is always great. Your customers and donors are looking for you to just kind of have some real talk with them. So a couple lines that say, "Hey, we take privacy seriously. Check out our privacy policy." Um, that does more than you would imagine. So.
yep, yep, for sure. With the Internet of Things thing, this is the last thing I want to say. With the Internet of Things thing, I'm really hoping that what that means is that security, that smart people in the industry are going to start making security in one way or another. What's the best way to say it? Easier to implement, basically. Because I
Mhm.
mean, like when you're talking about your microwave or some random device that's really not all that smart. All it really is just an open communication between like or your thermostat. It's
Yeah.
really not a whole lot of tech going on in that thermostat, but they just have a little tiny receiver in one way or another that's open to receive information from somewhere. And in order to make that secure, you can't have something really complex, or else you're just going to double the amount of hardware that's in that thing.
Yeah.
So I'm
And
hoping that
unfortunately, it's going to take a couple more large scale
major
attacks.
problems.
I
Yeah,
think,
exactly.
yeah. Each of those attacks creates an event where people step back and say, "Oh, I didn't know that could occur," or "I didn't even think about that." Right?
Yeah.
Um, the DDoS attack was mostly DVRs. and people didn't update their DVRs on security cameras and webcams, and these DVRs were all of a sudden turned on. So I mean, yeah, it's educating the consumer to keep their IoT devices up to date. It's a kick in the pants to all the folks that are programming for the IoT world to take extra precautions around it. But yeah, it's not something that I'm fearful about. It's something that I think as the market around IoT grows, security will be right there with it.
Nice. Yeah, cool. Well, thanks everybody so much. Thank you, Chris, for being on the show with us.
Thanks for having me on.
Appreciate it. Thanks so much for that Locker Give integration. We're totally excited to see that in action sometime in the near future. That's going to be great. And, everybody, make sure to set your calendars for March 8th, 5 p.m. Pacific. We'll be talking about payment gateways with some guys from Stripe.com. Thanks so much.